Hey guys, I'm Ethan Moore from Stockroom Supply. I've noticed lately I've been getting a fair amount of calls on guys looking to refinish or prepare or do their own trim in their homes. And they're asking a lot of questions about these sanding or molding sanders here, which is basically a big sanding mop. Now, I just kind of want to highlight how they work and why they work as well as they do. But quickly, I'll just sand a piece of molding here and kind of give you the rundown. It's just a little piece of cherry trim. It just needs sanding here. So I've got a 120 grit molding sander, and I will show you how this works. So you can see that there very quickly. That does a great job sanding it. So basically that piece of cherry is ready for a finish. Now the reason it works so well is kind of interesting. It has a lot to do with how the sandpaper is oriented. But first I want to talk about kind of all the relatively inexpensive ways you can sand molding. And the most inexpensive way is something like this. This is a flex pad, there's foam on the back. It's got sandpaper on it. So a lot of people will hand sand with something like that because it's flexible enough to get into all the nooks and crannies. But if you've ever done this, you know that is incredibly time consuming, but it certainly is the least expensive to get your trim sanded. Now, there are two main options that are approximately the same price, and that is our molding sander kit. Like this here. Here's the head of it here, and this is what they call a Mac mop. That's a cleaning store product, also something that we sell. Now, if you look carefully at the two of them, you'll notice that while they look similar, the sandpaper is oriented opposite directions. So the Mac mop, the flaps are oriented kind of parallel to the face that you're going to sand. So you put your trim in like that, where the molding sander, it's oriented perpendicular, so the opposite direction. Now, when I'm using a Mac mop like this, when I'm sanding something like this, it does a fairly good job because those fingers are relatively flexible, and any sort of round corner like that, it'll do a decent job of sanding. Something like this, though, if you've got a piece of trim like this that has kind of some sharp valleys and sharp corners, when I'm using a mop like this with a flap this direction, you can imagine those flaps will sit right on top of that peak, and it can really soften that peak right there. And at the same time, when I've got a sharp valley like that right there, it will never be able to get right down deep into that valley. It'll kind of go, it likely won't even touch the bottom. Where with the molding sander kit, as well as our sanding mops, it's kind of got almost like a sharper edge. So when I got to a point like this here, that sandpaper, it's going to slide down on one side or the other. And same as with a valley like that, the point of the sandpaper is going to go right down into the bottom of that valley. And it does a very good job of sanding anything with a lot of profile, a lot of details. So the main differences would be a Mac mop, while it's a good contour sander, it will soften edges, which maybe is what you want, where a molding sander head, like the ones we make, any sharp corners and edges, it will leave crisp, which maybe isn't exactly what you want. For most cases, when we're dealing with molding and trim, that is exactly what you're hoping for. So if you have something like this, and you're setting up the molding sander head, what I like to do, the bracket assembly it comes with is totally adjustable, so it comes as like a DIY kit. So you get the bracket assembly, which it gives you everything you need to make this head move up and down, like that. But it also comes with the pulleys and the belt. You need to provide your own motor or buy one separately, and you need to mount it to some piece of plywood, something like this here. So it's kind of a do-it-yourself system, and a lot of guys will fabricate some sort of dust collection system, as well as a belt guard for the belt here. So I'm just using the boom arm by Mullet, and that works fairly well for what I'm doing here. But as you can imagine, the mop head will blow a lot of sawdust around. But when you're setting up a piece of trim like this, what I like to do is kind of lay the molding sander down on that trim, And I just raise it up ever so slightly and tighten that in place. And once I turn the sander on, the overall head will get a little bigger diameter because of centrifugal force here. But that's all it takes there. So that's ready to be sanded. So again, this has a little bit of primer on it. This is a 120 grit head. Generally, folks are using 180 or 220 grit to sand primer or in between coats of finish. But this will give you an idea of how it's going to sand and how it's going to leave those nice sharp profiles here. So let me sand it here again. So if we look at that profile, still nice and sharp. It's done a good job of getting down in that valley. And you can see, if you back up a little bit, or maybe you can see it there really well, where I stopped sanding. So that right there will be, again, ready for a coat of paint. Generally, I wouldn't use this coarser grit to sand the primer, but that's just what I have on my head here. But yeah, it's a really, really cool sander. So if you're interested in saving yourself a whole bunch of time from hand sanding, or a bunch of money and paying someone to sand your molding, this molding sander kit is a really, really awesome option for you. Now, if the dust collection part of it is really important and you don't feel like fabricating yourself, we do offer what we call the Molding Master, which is a wider head and fully enclosed with a dust collection port. So if you got a commercial shop, that may be more, might make more sense for what you're doing there. So yeah, if anybody else has any questions, you could email me at info@stockroomsupply.com or just comment on the video. Thanks for watching.
I can predict a question that people have right now.
Okay, what's that?
Because I answered a lot. How long does one of those heads last?
That's a really good question. I should have, okay, so that's a good question, Kate. It depends. Really depends on what you're doing. If you're standing in between coats of finish, it's going to last a lot longer because generally you're not using it as aggressively as someone with raw trim or barn board type stuff would be using it. But we say on average about 10,000 linear feet of molding. I've heard of some guys getting upwards, I think 22,000, I think I've heard before, which is a ton of linear feet of molding. So long story short, the heads do last a really, really long time. So you don't have to replace them very often. The only reason to get additional heads would be if you want additional grits.